Director for the OPC, the Older Persons Commission. So wonderful to have so many of you here today. So OPC is pleased to host the monthly Mondays with the Mayor, with Mayor Barnett. And Mayor Barnett always has some important news you can use for the citizens of Rochester Hills. And we definitely think that the discussion today is something that the seniors can, or all of you in attendance can use today. So based on, many of you may not be aware that OPC is the transportation provider for Oakland Township, Rochester, and Rochester Hills. So last year we provided over 50,000 trips to seniors, getting them to their doctor's appointments, grocery stores, and for the disabled. So we're really understanding how important transportation is to help those age in place in their community. So we're very pleased to welcome this morning to OPC, Paul Fleck, Dataspeed founder and CEO, and Jean Setzfand of the AARP. She is the Senior Vice President of AARP Programs. So I'm going to turn the program over now to Mayor Barnett. Pleased to have you all here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. It is a privilege to be here. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's not too bad, but I think we can do a little better than that. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We are really thrilled to be here and excited to expand Mondays with the Mayor. How many of you have come to Mondays with the Mayor before? Raise your hand. All right, there's our regulars. Probably wondering who all these new people are. We're really excited to have you. We wanted to do a very special session today on mobility and the impact I think that it can have in our community, not just for our seniors, but on really how you, your kids, and your grandkids will traverse our community in the future. It's a really exciting discussion, and I don't know where you're at when you walked in today. Maybe some of you came here to find out what an autonomous vehicle is. Maybe you came in here because in your career, in your past, you worked on some of the great innovations in vehicles in this region and want to see what the next generation of mobility looks like. Maybe some of you came in here to poo-poo this whole thing and let us know that this will never happen and this Jetsons mentality is not where we should be spending our time. But we have some really great people that are here that are going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening, right here in Rochester Hills right now. And one of the most important parts of this, after we talk a little bit, is to maybe answer some of the crazy questions that you've heard, that you've thought about, that maybe you think autonomous vehicles and driverless cars are and are not. Now, Mondays with the Mayor has been going on since I've been mayor. I've been blessed to be the mayor of Rochester Hills for 12 years, and so many of the folks that come to Mondays with the Mayor, it's the first Monday of every month that we talk just about things that are going on in our community, new things that are happening. We try to talk about maybe rumors that you've heard, what new restaurants are coming in, when's that doggone construction going to be done, and so we really have a good discussion. So I would invite you back every Monday for the first Monday of every month. And where is Darlene? Is she in here? Oh, Darlene, I'm sorry. Darlene has been with me and is really my boss when I come to the OPC. And she's been doing Mondays with the Mayor with me for, I think, since I started this nearly 12 years ago. So please give a round of applause to Darlene. I really appreciate you. So, as I mentioned, this is a special edition of Mondays with the Mayor. We usually don't meet in this room, but we're pleased to be here today because we know that we have a lot of interest in this topic. And I've been really blessed to have a kind of a cool national role. Some of you know that currently I'm the Vice President of the United States Conference of Mayors. And next year, I will become the president, which essentially means that I'll be the mayor of the country, America's mayor. And as such, I get a lot of great opportunities to talk about and visit with people across the country on things that we see changing in our communities, things that we see important. And one of those things, perhaps more so than any other, is the issue of mobility. As the Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, next to the President, the current President and I have a 2-year plan talking about 3 I's. That's our goal when we talk about a national leadership for mayors. And the 3 I's are innovation, infrastructure, and inclusion. And if you think about all the different sized cities that are in the country, Rochester Hills is not one of the largest. In fact, generally, we're probably one of the smaller ones involved in this U.S. Conference of Mayors. But cities are working on those three issues. Every city has infrastructure needs. Every city is changing, and so ideas and issues relative to inclusion, whether they be age or race or the changing demographics of a community, are critically important. And of course, innovation is something that everyone's trying to embrace to try to service their populations more effectively and more efficiently. And maybe no topic is more inclusive of all three of those than the issue of mobility, right? Things that keep a mayor up at night: where will our people work in the future and how will they get there? Right? Two really, really critical questions that mayors and leaders in government are trying to wrestle with to see how things will change. And mobility has changed a lot. And so we're going to talk with two experts in the field. Really, really excited to introduce them to you today. Jean, who was just mentioned, gets a lot of credit because she jumped on a plane at 5:30 this morning from Baltimore to be with you here today. And so I don't know what time you woke up.
2:30.
2:30.
So if I don't make sense, please forgive me.
I went to bed at 2 o'clock this morning, so we basically have a pretty good system here. We can complement each other well. But really excited. Jean is as was mentioned, the Senior Vice President of AARP. There's no finer organization that's advocating and representing the voice of America's senior citizens in the AARP. And in my role, in this national role, we've gotten to work with their organization quite a bit. And so we're really, really proud to bring their senior leadership here to Rochester Hills and really show off the OPC because we love this facility. We are exceptionally proud of the leadership team here and all the vibrancy that exists in this organization. So we've been really excited to bring AARP here. A little bit about Jean. She's leading AARP's Livable Communities team. And they work nationally to talk about livable places. They actually featured something on our region recently in a national publication. So your senior friends around the country, maybe in Arizona, Florida, all those places in the South, have been reading about Rochester Hills as one of America's most livable communities. They produce interactive educational programming, some of which you may have passed on the way in, and I'm sure Jean will talk a little bit more about their smart driver technology, or their smart driver tech program. But prior to joining AARP, she worked as a strategic management consultant, serving domestic and international financial services. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania and an MBA in finance from the University of Chicago. So we welcome you, Jean. Thank you for being here. And you think those universities are cool. Paul Fleck graduated from an even cooler and more prestigious university, Oakland University. That's where I went. That's why I said that. There's some OU fans in the crowd. Who cares about the University of Chicago? We've got Oakland University. Paul's a good friend, and Paul is going to talk to you a little bit from a unique perspective of one of the people in the community developing this technology that's happening all around the world. He's the founder and CEO of Dataspeed, that is located right here in Rochester Hills. And as I mentioned, as a graduate of Oakland University, you'll see us joke about that, I think, in the video. Dataspeed is really transforming the automotive and manufacturing industries through the development of driverless technologies, driverless vehicles, and mobile robots. One of those you passed and probably didn't even notice it on your way into the meeting today, sitting in our parking lot. Paul has over 30 years of technological and engineering experience building a world-class team, hardware, software, algorithm, and mechanical engineers passionate about the field of robotics. And for those of you that don't know, we're really proud. As the mayor of the city of Rochester Hills, I meet mayors all the time. You meet the mayor of Hershey, Pennsylvania, they'll tell you about how much chocolate they make. You meet a mayor in Florida, they'll tell you about how many days of sunshine they have. As the mayor of Rochester Hills, I am proud to say, and I hope you echo me in this, that more robots are made in the city of Rochester Hills than any other city in North America. We are the robotic capital of our continent. So we're pretty proud, and Paul's one of the folks that's working on that and that technology. And this is very interesting. In August, just a few months ago, Forbes identified Dataspeed as one of the 4 companies in the nation selling self-driving car platforms today that are really leading the industry. So one of the industry leaders right here in our own backyard. So we're gonna hear a little bit more from Paul and Jean in just a few minutes. But let me just set the table for a minute, as I mentioned, as to maybe why we're here. One of the great things that is incumbent upon me as mayor is to start community conversations. Sometimes those are easy. It might be about a new development happening in the city. It might be about a construction project. Sometimes they're more difficult. It could be about a challenging economy or something changing in the community that we're trying to deal with. And oftentimes what we can do and can be most effective in is bringing people together and starting those very difficult or challenging conversations. And I really feel that's what we want to do today, is start this conversation about autonomous vehicles. I have no idea what brought you here today. Some of you may be excited. You love technology. You have you race to get the new iPhone. You love having all the gadgets. You teach your kids and grandkids about the new things that you found that make your life easy. Some of you may be on the other side of that. You have a flip phone. You still have a home phone. You're not too cool with technology. How many of you still have the wrong hour on your clocks from Saturday night, flipping forward or falling back an hour? Some of you are maybe where technology isn't as normal or as easy to embrace. And when the idea of a driverless vehicle, getting in a vehicle with no steering wheel and saying, take me to Meyer, doesn't seem to be real. Doesn't seem like something you'll experience. It's something that your kids or your grandkids will experience. And I'm here to tell you that that's happening right now in Rochester Hills and all across the country. And so one of the things we want to do is begin those conversations so that you can ask questions, that you can understand where this technology is. How might it be useful for you? What applications are specifically designed for the senior population? Because I think that's one of the exciting things about what we feel driverless technology will do for the senior population. Perhaps some of the greatest low-hanging fruit will be senior citizens embracing and understanding how driverless technology could enhance and lengthen the mobility of seniors in our community. This microphone's kind of coming in and out. Can you hear me all right? All right. So to get things started in that community conversation, which again I think I mentioned is important. I'll tell you a quick story, then we'll show you a short video, and then we'll get to our guest. I think about the importance of starting that conversation because I remember a few years ago when I sat before our seniors and I said, listen, there's something coming to our community. I need to explain it to you because some of you are going to hate it. Some of you still might hate it, so I always get a little nervous bringing this up. But we have roundabouts coming to Rochester Hills, and I want you to understand how to use them. Yeah, there's a good boo in the back. Thank you for that. Probably my grandma. And one of the things that we talked about with roundabouts was how technology is changing the way we drive, and roundabouts move traffic more efficiently, more effectively, and they're cheaper to build. And if you've seen over the last dozen years, or so maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, they're coming in all across Oakland County, right? And the initial reaction was, like maybe some of you still have, is, oh gosh, I'll specifically avoid any road that has a roundabout. I just don't want to go anywhere near them. And as we poll throughout the years that we have now 7 in the city of Rochester Hills, every time we poll, more and more people are getting accustomed to them. They learn how to drive them. Most of the comments I hear are, I personally, Mayor, I love roundabouts, but it's all those other idiots that don't know how to drive them. And as soon as you hear that over and over, you go, at some point you have to be talking to some of those other idiots, right? You can't all. But anyway, it's interesting, and that discussion, that community discussion about introducing roundabouts in the community was one that we needed to have. We needed to show videos. We needed to reteach folks like what it meant, how you get to where you want to go, so that that level of fear would be diminished. And I think we're at the same situation with the idea of autonomous vehicles. Right now, I'm going to make an assumption that many of you are fearful of autonomous vehicles, getting in them, seeing them on the road. You've heard about the death that has occurred or deaths that have occurred, and there is some concern about how they will be rolled out in an application or in a place like Rochester Hills or in Metro Detroit. And so a lot of that starts with an understanding and some communication and some discussion. So one of the things I do every year is a State of the City address. We do a really crazy, fun State of the City address. This last year I came down from the ceiling in a harness playing an electric guitar. We have a lot of fun with it. You're all welcome. But this year one of the things we did was I shot a video with Paul driving around the streets of Rochester Hills in an autonomous driverless vehicle, and I think we can show that now. Take a look. I'm here with Paul Fleck, the founder and CEO of Dataspeed right here in Rochester Hills, and I am experiencing my first ride in an autonomous vehicle. Look, Ma, no hands. Paul, this is fantastic. your company is doing this right here in our city. What kind of technology are you putting into this vehicle to make it do this?
So we designed a highly integrated electronic system that allows us to control the throttle, the brake, and the steering.
The cool part about this is that the technology and the testing is happening right here in Rochester Hills. Your team of about how many professionals working in?
So we've got 11 full-time engineers. I'm an OU graduate, as is.
Go OU. I bet OU is much more proud of you for this than they are of me. What do you think is a likely time frame where you'd see actually sort of the mass production of something like this for people to be able to use in their daily lives?
I'd say three to 4 years. It's very well accepted. There's over 300 of these vehicles on the road in the United States, in China, and in Europe, all produced right here in Rochester Hills, Michigan.
So it's happening, a couple other examples. I don't know if you order a pizza in Columbus, Ohio, there's a 50% chance that it's going to be delivered in a driverless vehicle. If you get an Uber or a Lyft in Pittsburgh between the rivers, there's about a 50% chance you're going to be getting into a car without a driver. Not in the future, right now. If you were to go there this weekend, that's what would happen. So I guess, Jean, my first question for you, and I'll ask the same question for Paul, is why driverless vehicles? What is the purpose of this? What is the reason that so many companies, people, individuals, the AARP, Dataspeed, from all different angles are investing in this technology? Why is it so exciting?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for hosting us today. It's really a wonderful delight to be with all of you today. Again, my name is Jean Setzfand from AARP, and the reason why AARP, for those of you who may not know us, I love the red shirts, love the red hat. We are a membership organization, like the mayor said, who represent the interest of those 15 and above, 38 million members across the country. And why we care about this is we actually outlive our ability to drive for close to a decade. So think about that. For 10 years, you're not going to be able to use your car to get to the grocery store, to go visit friends, to go to the doctor's appointments, to not be able to vote tomorrow, which I hope all of you will be doing. So that's why we care about it. And we've been in the business, quite frankly, of keeping people safe on roads for many, many decades. We've been teaching safe driving courses actually here in this facility. You'll likely have seen the smart driver tech when you first came in. Our hope is to actually make sure that we extend safe driving years for our members and 50-plus drivers for as long as possible. First, with the notion of how you actually use a roundabout and making sure that you understand sort of the safe driving behaviors. And more so now, we know that technology is there to help us, first in our vehicles, and that's what you saw when you first entered in today. The Smart Driver Tech is all about taking a look at the technology within your vehicle and how you use that to, again, extend your safe driving years. How do you use that reverse driving camera? What are those beeping things that are happening on the side of my mirrors? What is that telling me? How are the course corrections and making sure that you're staying within your lanes work? What are all the features that either are included in my vehicle or I can purchase in my next vehicle? What's that all about? So we want to do that and making sure that all drivers are acclimated and comfortable with technology in your vehicle, to then extending that technology outside of the vehicle into your phone and how you can use that to hail a ride share that somebody, a neighbor of yours, a friend of yours is actually driving and giving you a ride in return for a small fee. And all of those advances in technology, whether it's on a smart app or in your vehicle, will help us understand how we can widen our mobility options so that regardless of whether you're driving or somebody else is driving, you'll always be able to access transportation options to do what you need to do, to be really independent and not be isolated. So that's really why we care about it.
Sure. Paul, why does the world need vehicles that drive themselves?
So I guess let me ask us a question. How many in here know somebody maybe very close to them that has been either killed or injured in an automobile accident? So I think a large percentage of the population, including myself and ultimately, we do what we do at Dataspeed to help provide technology that will ultimately lead to safer vehicles. And and I'll try to relate this story to the people in this room. My story that kind of got me started on this journey is I lost a cousin to an accident where a split-second decision on her part of inattention, she pulled out in front of somebody and she had a side impact and she died. And that happens about 100 times a day, over 100 times a day. We lose over 30,000 people a year in the United States alone from traffic fatalities. And there's technology out there today that will reduce and minimize that situation. So first and foremost is to make safer vehicles. Now, the other additional benefit for driverless vehicles is, and I'll relate that to her father, my Uncle Jerry, who just turned 90, and his sons, they had to make the very difficult decision of basically intervening on his behalf to have his driver's license removed. He took his last driver's test, and I think he only went through about half of the stop signs and did about half the things wrong. But it was still to the point where he was no longer safe to drive. So with autonomous vehicles, somebody in that situation, maybe they could remain mobile longer through the use of technology to kind of help them still remain a safe driver. So the other benefit would be remain the mobility and your autonomy longer. So
sure. Yeah, great points. We mentioned a little bit in the intro that, and I think you mentioned in the video, that you think we're several years away from seeing this fully implemented. Maybe talk a little bit about that. How soon do you think we'll start to see, obviously your team drove an autonomous vehicle here, so it is happening here today, but where do you think you'll start to see this roll out, and where might the folks in this room start to see autonomous vehicles first, and how soon do you think they might actually own or participate in a rideshare with an autonomous vehicle?
So the industry, they describe autonomy and what they call level 1, which is still a driver in full control of the vehicle, to what's called level 5 autonomy, where you remove the steering wheel and then you give the driver absolutely no ability to control that vehicle. And in between levels 2, 3, and 4 are varying degrees of autonomy. And I guess I would equate technology in the automobile to you won't just wake up one day and have driverless cars. You'll see a migration of technologies and increased capabilities that will roll out with new model years over time. I know at General Motors they introduced, I think it's called Super Cruise, which gives you, it's probably the most advanced system today. It's to give you basically more capabilities, semi-autonomous capabilities to kind of lighten the load as the driver. I don't think the inclusion of this will be as surprising or as to people as you'd think. A piece of technology we're all used to using every day is your cruise control, right? That's technology where you have a computer that helps to take over for you, and we all have this introduced and you get used to it. You just make it part of your driving habits. So I think you'll see the same thing with autonomy. So.
Gene, one of the interesting things, a couple of facts. 70% of Americans think that autonomous vehicles are coming and will be here in short order. But 74% of people don't think they'll ever own one. Kind of the technology that they think is great for someone else, but I always want to be able to have a steering wheel and drive my car. And a lot of that has to do with fear, right? And there's been certainly well-publicized situations where there was, of course, the death in Arizona. There was the self-driving bus that crashed in its first hour. There was lots of challenges when you roll out technology. Where do you think this will be relative to this conversation about how do you assuage people's fear? Anytime you have a new technology, that there are going to be some challenges along the way, but ultimately, as Paul mentioned, 90% of fatalities are caused by driver error. And I guess I'm going to take a wild stab here. I'm guessing with this crowd, one of the most frustrating things you see on the road now is distracted driving. Is it not? Texting, and you stop at a light and you see people, the head is down. I've driven past people that I think are, mid-text and maybe you've yelled at your kids or grandkids about this, but 90% of traffic fatalities are caused by driver error. So there's certainly not, we don't come from a perfect scenario here, but there's a lot of fear about letting go of the steering wheel. How do you approach that? What do you tell seniors and folks as this technology draws closer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. Fear is by far one of the issues here, right? And again, the first question that the mayor asked in terms of why AARP is involved very much is from that vantage point of ensuring that as the rollout of the technology is embedded by OEMs as well as rideshare organizations, technology companies, that they actually have the consumer's interest at heart. So one of the reasons why we're very interested in this issue, we see the promise, as you probably heard me say before. We think that the technology will bring more solutions around better transportation, better mobility options, but at the same time, we want to make sure that with the benefits, we're actually addressing the safety concerns from everybody in this room, including myself. I'll tell you a little sort of quick aside in terms of my own personal story here. I have a mother who's 81 years old. She's never been a great driver, to tell you the truth. We used to call her Mrs. Magoo. She's always kind of head in the clouds a little bit, and she's actually gotten much better. But I want to be able to use these transportation options for my mother. I want her to be able to get to the grocery store, to go to church when she wants to, whether she's driving or not. And frankly, a lot of these, if I feel like it is a solution that I can put my loved one, my mother, in a car, first as just even somebody else driving, to then robotics or autonomous functions, technologies driving, I want to know everything I can about it. And so that's really, I think, the concern that, not so much concern, but the reason why AARP wants to be at the forefront, having conversations with mayors, like Mayor Barnett, who's really forward-thinking on the cutting edge of this, thinking about it from Rochester Hill's perspective in terms of what are the local policies needed in order to bring this safely to this community, to then of the technology firms and also car makers to say, where is the consumer in the conversation as you're building the vehicle, building the technology? How are you thinking about how, again, not only people of all ages, how are they going to be able to access it? Again, I have kids myself. Sometimes I think I'd rather have a robot driving than my 16-year-old, quite frankly, in a car. And so how will these things work, whether it's having me call up a car who's going to be taking my daughter to swimming rather than either my husband and I trying to logistically figure out how to do this, to, again, somebody who, for me, I commute an hour a day to get to work. I would love to use that hour to actually work or do something other than driving. To my mother, who is going to get to a point where she's not going to be able to drive anymore. So our concern is about making sure that we're at the front end, listening to the technology firms, to the local leaders, to the OEMs, so that we have the best insights to then share with all of you. We want to be able to bring to you at the front of the conversation, this is how things are unfolding. This is where the local leaders are kind of trying to figure out what's best for all of you. This is what the technology looks like, feels like. How do you kind of wrap your head around this, from everything related to the cost, how much you're gonna have to pay in order to either access this through the technologies that you're currently purchasing, to then paying a technology firm to again access it, so on and so forth, to then the safety aspects of it. So we want to stay very much involved in all parts of this conversation so that we can bring that information to all of you.
Jean, you used a term called ride share. And it's a term that's used quite a lot, but I'm going to guess that some people in the crowd might not know exactly what that means. Can you tell us what, kind of in your mind, what the different aspects of rideshare are, so kind of maybe we can talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Who knows what a Lyft or an Uber is? Okay. That is consistent with all of the research that we've done. roughly about 80 to 90% have an awareness of it. How many people are currently using it? Okay, also consistent with our research. So for the general population, people of all ages, it's roughly about half of the population in the US right now are using Uber or Lyft. For our constituents over 50, it's roughly about 30%. So ride shares are in essence the app that you download called Lyft or Uber, there's plenty of others as well, where any one of us, quite frankly, can go through a certification process with each of the companies and begin to drive. And then they turn on the driver's side, an application that says, okay, I'm available to drive. And if somebody who's kind of close to you needs a ride from point A to point B, you can pick them up, earn some money, and then also the other person can get access to a ride. So it's essentially a kind of an open source taxi service, lack of a better word. But most of you, again, raised your hand so you know what it is. Why we care about this is we believe that ride shares is literally the rails in which autonomous vehicles will probably begin to populate across the US. So you heard the mayor talk about Pittsburgh and Uber using the technology within their their Uber system in Pittsburgh. So 50% chance that you get into an Uber in Pittsburgh and somebody will be driving, or literally you're going to have an autonomous system that's driving. And frankly, when we were in Pittsburgh for one of the meetings for the US Conference of Mayors, I had a chance to ride in it. It's the most boring thing. It's no different than if you're riding in a car with somebody else driving it. Because right now, as much as you saw the mayor and Paul in that autonomous vehicle riding in the car with the steering wheel, that's essentially what happens. You still have safety drivers behind the wheel that they can actually take over if anything happens. But point is, we believe rideshare is actually the first point of introduction to autonomous vehicles, because again, that's the system in which we'll likely get introduced to this whole notion of autonomous vehicles. Make sense?
It does. And, I'm always curious, for those of you who were here at my last Mondays with the mayor, I gave our team an assignment to Uber somewhere over the month. I don't know if anybody's done it yet. I just pulled up an Uber from here to the Rochester Hills Public Library, and it's $4.90, and it will be here in 6 minutes. So if you've never used it, obviously it's a very interesting and helpful technology. If you ever want to talk about it, Thanksgiving's coming up, talk about it with your kids and grandkids. See how they use it and how quickly it has changed and transformed their mobility. Say that, you think about how far we've come, and used this saying before, 20 years ago, we used to say very authoritatively, and maybe you can remember saying this, don't meet people on the internet and don't talk to strangers, right? And now we literally use the internet to summon strangers to us, and we get in their car, right? And then we let them take us somewhere. So, we've come a really long way. Yet again, have that conversation with the younger folks around your Thanksgiving table, and ask them how often they do it. And you'll find that folks use it to get to Tiger games. They use it, as I mentioned, if I wanted to get to the library and I didn't have a car right now, I could do it for under $5. And so it's a very interesting technology, and it has really changed. And it gives us pause to think about how much, in that sort of silly example I just mentioned about strangers and the internet, how much it's changed in 20 years. And if you can imagine where we go in the next 5 to 7, that thinking about getting into a vehicle with nobody else in it and saying, take me to my doctor's appointment, it's not maybe as far-fetched as you might think. Paul, ride sharing from your perspective with some of the technology that you're working on, do you see that being maybe a first step that might be sort of rolled out, that people might maybe not own their own vehicle, but that there might be additional ways that there might be vehicles for groups, or maybe OPC vehicles that would take people around? Maybe talk a little bit about what you see happening there.
So right now we're kind of in a transition phase, I guess, for autonomy, in the fact that some of the technology that's required, mainly I call it LiDARs, the LiDAR is the device that is required for probably the safest device for the vehicle to see. And right now, there's a lot of technology providers that they're trying to develop the ultimate LiDAR that can be integrated into a vehicle and and meet the styling demands as required for a consumer device or a consumer vehicle. The minivan that we have outside is a Chrysler Pacifica, and you'll see on top of the vehicle the 3 bumps. Those 3 bumps are the 3 LiDARs that we have on top of that vehicle. And I don't think for large-scale deployment that the styling folks at the big 3 will want those there ultimately. So that technology needs to be integrated into the vehicle. But the guys that really don't care about that today are the rideshare vehicle, the mobility as a service suppliers, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, that they want to put you in, they call them robo-taxis. And those vehicles, that technology exists today, so they can put that, a sensor suite on top of the vehicle and make a fully autonomous robo-taxi. So,
if you think about this, I want you to think about all the impact that this could have. So this is maybe one of those moments where this information kind of washes over you, but I want you to recall it later, to think about the changes that this will have on society. And if there's any sort of takeaway from our panel discussion here is that, these changes are coming. And the way that you prepare not only your home, but a community, your family, the economic environment around you is really important. Think about a couple things. You jotted some of these down, the way that mobility in general is changing. By the way, if you talk to the folks at Ford, we have a really good relationship with Ford. A lot of great car companies around here. One of the reasons that I've been able to have a national voice is because so much of this technology is happening. We say now that the region that put the world on wheels is now talking about taking one of them away, the steering wheel. And really wants to be, at the front of mobility. If you talk to Ford, they're not an automobile company anymore. They say we're in the field of mobility. We want to talk about how we get people where they need to be in the future. Think about some of these changes. Obviously, we talked about mobility, maybe specifically as it relates to this crowd. At some point, there's, as you mentioned, Jean, there's data that suggests you're going to live 10 years beyond when you might be able to drive. So extending mobility for the senior population is really big. Think about the advantages for potentially the disabled community that really struggles with mobility now, and the opportunity for that community to have mobility or have mobility extended is really important. We talked a little bit about traffic safety, being able to reduce. There is a national goal to get to 0 deaths, to have 0 emissions. Those things are only possible, right, using technology to get us there. You talk about sustainability, the fact that as a planet and all the things we talk about with emissions controls and trying to reduce our carbon footprint, that the electrification of vehicles has great promise for us to, can you imagine a time in the future where you think about the most valuable pieces of property in my city right now are often held by gas stations, right? They're the corners of every major intersection, and what an unfortunate use, right, for some of the most valuable, prominent properties in our city. And if you think in the future, maybe those go away and you can reimagine pocket parks, you reimagine different retail and different commercial, different kinds of development from, right now you imagine telling your kids, you grew up in a time when there were gas stations on every corner, and the kids going, oh my God, I can't believe there used to be gas stations here, that's so silly. You talk about jobs and the economy. Boy, this is a really important one. I was very fortunate a while back to have a lunch with Bill Gates, and it was a very small group of people. And one of the things he shared with us, he said, the most important thing that we can do is educate the next generation. Education. We said, well, that's interesting. It was kind of a unique thing. He said, why? He said, because jobs are changing. He said, you're not going to have we're not that far away from living in a world where there aren't waiters and waitresses, where there aren't flower delivery people, where there aren't, all those things are changing, and those skill level jobs are changing. Now there'll be new jobs, there'll be technicians, there'll be safety folks, there'll be lots of new jobs that are creating this new economy, but over the road hauling, that's one of the first ones that people talk about, the folks that drive for a living. Those jobs probably have a lifespan, and it's probably not that long. And so you talk about the impact of mobility. I was talking with a group that said probably the first major thing that you'll see, all the trucks that drive on the road, the big semi-trucks, is you'll see the introduction of these long-haul semis. Instead of 5 drivers taking 5 trucks, they'll caravan 5 trucks with 1 driver or an autonomous vehicle at the front, driving 5 trucks from Boston to LA, eliminating 4 jobs essentially, but creating others in the process. But that sort of thing where you just have a person that sits behind a wheel, those kinds of jobs are changing. This is a very touchy mic, sorry. All this high technology, we need to invest in a mic. You talk about public finance. Think about the ways that municipalities make money. You can imagine, how many of you have ever gotten a ticket? You can raise your hands. Ideally, autonomous vehicles follow the law, right? They don't speed. That might frustrate you if you're used to driving 80 up north to your cabin and you can only go 65 or 75. Ideally, autonomous vehicles are going to have you stop at that stop sign completely, stop at the intersection completely, and so municipalities and government agencies might not make any money on tickets, right? Kind of an interesting thought, right? Some of you think we'll still find a way, right? But you think about how public finance could change. Maybe there isn't a need for parking meters anymore, because instead of getting out and parking and stopping your vehicle, you get in the car and you say, all right, now go pick up my daughter and take her to Kroger. And the car takes off and goes to your home to pick up your daughter and take her to Kroger. So the idea of parking may change. One of the first things they tell us in my level of government is, boy, if you are still planning on building a parking structure, you had better put those ideas on hold. And I think that's where you're starting to see some of those things change, because parking structures, we didn't, I'm Rochester Hills, so they just built a couple in Rochester. But those are incredibly expensive, and they're not great land uses, right? No one says, oh my gosh, you've got to come to downtown Rochester. We have the most amazing parking structures, right? But you think about downtown, you want to get to the Fox Theater, you want to get to Tiger Stadium, you want to get to maybe somebody want to get to a Lions game, I don't know. What do you look for? You look for places to park, on-street parking, surface level parking structures. Those are really expensive, not great land uses for a community, because guess what happens when the game's over? And on the weekends, if it's not supporting the comp you were building or something, they're largely empty. And they're incredibly expensive. Tens of thousands of dollars per space. And so you think about how land use could change in a community if you had more ride sharing. If instead of 2 vehicles for your car, if you had a scenario where a car dropped me off at work, and then it went and picked up my wife and dropped her off at work, and then it went and picked up our kids and dropped them back home, that's not that far away. And you think about how much you could save if you didn't have 2 insurance payments, right? And you didn't fill up both of your cars with gas 4 times a month, right? And you start to think about how economically it could change your position as a family. And so these things, the reason I like to have these conversations, and maybe one of those things will move you. Maybe it's the jobs, maybe it's it's the single car, maybe one of those things hopefully you'll think about later and realize that these sorts of things are the kinds of conversations that people like Paul and his very talented engineering team and others, you talk about every month, not even every month, every week you're seeing a major car company combined with Waymo or Google or someone else and investing hundreds of millions of dollars in this technology, because it's absolutely coming. And I think that's one of the exciting things, is that having these conversations locally in Rochester Hills, I want my seniors to be the best prepared for this technology when it rolls out, to not go, I don't really understand what rideshare is, or I can't imagine a vehicle like this. And I heard the mayor talk, it was kind of silly, I didn't believe him when he said it, but now I've seen it. I've seen the news covering some of these conversations about it. And so I think that's part of the discussion too, that we wanted to have today, is think about all the ways these things could change. Paul, I want to ask you a question to follow up with Jean. We've talked a lot about a lot of these different things. What do you think is the biggest value, the biggest reason for these folks to get excited about this technology eventually coming? What is the most practical thing that you think will apply to their lives moving forward?
So, vehicles will be safer. I think that's the first and foremost reason why. And the second is you'll have increased mobility. You'll be able to do more what you want longer, either directly by driving or being in an autonomous vehicle that's taking you there, or through one of the rideshare programs, mobility as a service provider. So, and all those things ultimately lead to, I think, a better quality of life. So.
Yeah, that's great. Usually comes back to that quality of life. Jean, anything you want to add on that?
I think Paul covered it all. I think the only other thing that I'll just reinforce is the connections that you have in your community. We know that, based again on our surveys, that most people love the community they live in. 8 out of 10 want to stay in their community, also stay in their homes. But in order for that to happen and to continue to have the sort of thriving lives that you have, you want to be able to connect with others. And so I think one of the most promising things with this technology is that it continues to allow us to do that forever. There's never a gap in that ability to connect with others within your community.
That's really important. That's really the purpose of a facility like the OPC, is so that you can continue to woodwork, it's so you can continue to swim, and so you can continue to play bridge, to connect with folks, to travel with folks that are in a similar life experience. And that's one of the things I think is most exciting. Now, we want to get to your questions here in just a second. We want to, about 11:15, we're hoping to get back and let everybody go so we can get outside. You can take a look at the vehicle as you leave and maybe talk to some of us after. But just think about this for a minute. Think about how technology is changing, and then I want to answer your questions and certainly open the panel there. Even simple things in our lives. Yesterday we got home from church, my wife and I, and my wife said, we need to go grocery shopping. And you know how we grocery shopped? We sat on our couch watching the Lions lose. And my kids came in and we said, what do you need? And my wife wrote it down, and then she used her phone. She ordered it from Meijer, and before the end of the Lions game, people delivered it to our home, and we put it in our shelves, and we made dinner with what we had purchased on our phone watching the Lions game, never having left our house. And of course, I don't know how many of you use Shipt or any of the other services that are out there, but I haven't been to a grocery store in a long time. And you think about, okay, well, a lot of things they can automate, but going to the grocery store is something that is always going to be important for people to pick their own vegetables and to make sure they're able to use their coupons and all the different things that are important. And I can tell you, I really enjoyed sitting watching television. Maybe not so much the Lions game, but I didn't miss it. I didn't miss the traffic. I didn't miss finding a cart. I didn't miss finding a parking spot. I didn't care what the weather was. I used technology yesterday, and it probably frankly saved me money, because I don't know if you are like I am, but when I go to Meijer, I go for 8 things and I leave with 30. I've got to try something new, something's on special, there's someone making something that I try, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the best thing I've ever had, I'll buy 3. And so, those are simple things that exist now, and it's all about, it's about mobility, it's about technology, it's about improving, as Paul said, the quality of life for people. And we enjoyed it as a Barnett family yesterday by watching a football game together and having someone else do our grocery shopping. And so when you think about how we're going to do that in the future, how we're going to get around a community like ours, how many of you would like to see less traffic in the city of Rochester Hills? I would. It's about the number one complaint we have in the city is traffic. You can imagine if we had less vehicles on the street, but people were still able to go where they wanted to go. Those are the things that excite me as a mayor. Those are the things that I want to talk to as many people about this, because I'm excited about the possibility of what this technology will bring. So let me stop right here. I know there's some great questions out there. Let me see if we can answer some of these questions since we have such a great panel of experts. I'm going to try to go left to right, so over here in the corner.
What is the expected effect this would have on our car insurance rates?
Anybody prepared to?
That's a great question, because in some ways, if you actually end up getting rid of your car, you don't have car insurance anymore. I think one of the biggest questions out there is this whole notion of liability. So there could potentially be rider insurance in the future. So that's something new that I think we all have to kind of wrap our heads around. Hopefully that begins to give you a sense of, I think, where that spectrum is.
It sounds like we're still working on that part of it. I mean,
There
that's
is.
a big part.
It is a very big part.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It was a part of a very interesting discussion. The two very challenging parts, and I think I might have shared it last time, liability and a lot of very challenging ethical questions related to autonomous vehicles. Liability, if there is an accident, who's at fault? That's a very significant and honest question that people are looking at in ethical questions. If there's ever a situation where an autonomous vehicle has to make a decision about crashing into this vehicle or that vehicle or going off the road to avoid something, there's a process that has to happen. And those are, I was actually listening to Bill Ford Jr. talk about, those are very challenging components to this that people are dealing with to try to get to some answers. But they're working on them, and we'll see what happens. How many of you would like to not have a car insurance payment? I'm getting ready to have a 16-year-old son in a year or so, and I'm scared to death about that envelope that says how much my insurance is going to change. Great question. Next, we're moving in this direction. Yes, sir.
I like the idea of having a designated driver, but I was wondering how does it handle those small situations like getting gas, or oil change, those type of things?
Paul?
Gosh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The question, are you talking about how an autonomous vehicle gets gas and oil changes and maintenance items?
So these types are, they'd be done at a dealership generally, and the technology that's going to be on these vehicles need to be cared for a certain way. So like our dealers will have to be kind of retrained in understanding the sensing systems and how to make sure everything stays calibrated and safe. And they probably handle your oil change too. If you've got a gas engine, you might have an electric motor, so you might not need oil changes anymore. But through dealerships, I'd say.
I think that brings up an interesting question, though, in terms of, we've been talking a lot about ride shares and why that's important. The cost of these vehicles are going to be, I think, another interesting question, whether people will actually buy them individually, or are they going to be more ownership from a fleet perspective, again, with the Ubers, the Lyfts, the ride, or the big car manufacturers as well. So I think your question is a good one that prompts that sort of broader question around, am I, Jean, going to buy one, or am I going to actually use it through, again, the purchase of a ride from another organization, in which case, I don't care about the maintenance. Somebody else has that taken care of.
If you think about your budget, my wife and I both have two vehicles. They both pay over $300 a month in car payment. We both pay probably about the same in I think my insurance payment is about $2,000 for the year. And then my fuel allowance is about $300 to $400 for both of our vehicles. And all of a sudden, it's next to my house payment. It's the most expensive thing the Barnett family pays for. And I have a friend of mine who has a Tesla, and he paid $70,000 for it. I thought, gosh, I could never pay for a $70,000 car. And then he said, how much do you pay for your gas a month? And I said, $400. He said, do that over 5 years. And he said, you know what my insurance payment is? And I started to do the numbers and thought, okay, it's not as different. The gap is not what I thought it was when you start to think about how much you're actually paying, not just in your car payment, for those of you that still have a car payment, but in your insurance and in the fuel costs and in all the other ancillary costs. Yes, over here. Yes.
I have a question for Paul. I have a crash avoidance system on my car. Periodically it stops working because I have to clean the sensor off. So I was wondering how that was going to be treated going forward. And then the other thing I was reading is that if we really increase the amount of electric vehicles, that's going to put a big drag on the grid that we may not be able to begin with. So I was wondering if you could address that.
Can everyone hear the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So your sensor that you manually clean off now, they would have to remain clean for the system to operate properly. I don't have the exact answer for that, but I'm sure that there's a tier 1 supplier out there, that is going to look at those types of problems and come up with a solution. As far as what was the other?
Your second question?
The electrification.
Oh, yeah, the grid. Well, there's I don't know about the electric. There's a lot of concern about all the data that's going to be used and all the data that's associated. You think about all the smart vehicles and all the vehicles that are communicating. You already have those vehicles that can pull up and parallel park on their own in a system. And so there's a lot of talk in our industry, government, that is, about who's going to own the data, how secure the data will be. And I think you see folks talking about the infrastructure needed, smart roads going in where literally there's technology in the streets that is designed to accept and understand how much data is going to be needed in these vehicles in the future. So it's certainly something that that the industry is aware of. So much so that they're, you talk about 5G communication, you talk about broadband going there, you talk about all the other ancillary industries recognizing that big data is coming, and security of that data, and who's going to own, who's going to pay for that infrastructure are all questions that we're talking about now. Question from this side, in the very corner over here. Yes.
Do our winners here in Michigan pose a problem for autonomous cars? Because we do have some pretty, we have sleet, we have snow.
So my understanding of how autonomous vehicle works is it's like us as a brain, and it has to learn how to literally drive and understand the conditions. So in some ways, a lot of the testing that's happening on the road is helping these vehicles get smarter and smarter each day. So they're kind of learning how to react to different conditions. I heard also an interesting story about there's another competing technology organization called Nutonomy, which is testing autonomous vehicles in Singapore first and then in Boston. And when they first introduced the vehicle in Boston, they started driving, and every 10 feet it would stop, and it would start and stop. And we're like, what's going on? This didn't happen to us in Singapore. Does anybody know what's really, so they're using this test down at the seaport of Boston. Anybody can venture a guess as to why the vehicle is doing that?
Red Sox.
Red Sox. That is very Boston, but there's something else very Boston about the seaport, which are seagulls that didn't exist in Singapore. So the cars had to, again, learn the condition, not only of roads, weather, but birds, in order to then be reprogrammed to then react to that. So hopefully that helps answer the question. It may not initially, but it'll get smarter on the road.
Yes. Yes.
Hi, my first question is, how fast can I get one? Second question is, what percentage of AI does it use, and what kind of technology do the cameras use? Do they use night vision too, or infrared? And also, has anybody thought about how, or would it be available that I could have my own autonomous car, and then I could go on a car drive, and it would describe for me what we're passing? Similar to what, when I go to a movie, I use a secondary audio program, and it tells me what's going on the screen because I can't see it.
Great question. Thank you.
So, the exact percentage of AI, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, although I can tell you that there will be some form of AI in these vehicles.
AI is?
Artificial intelligence, there are neural networks, there are algorithms that learn based upon images and things of that sort. So it seems to be one of the key technology components that will be, at least in the vision system.
Are they connected to the internet?
So your vehicle long term, even today, will be will be connected to the internet, because IoT, Internet of Things, because to really exploit the capability of these vehicles, that vehicle wants to be tied to a network if it's available, so you can get map data and things of that sort. And then the feature they talked about where maybe the vehicle could describe to you what it's seeing, if you're visually impaired, that's probably very feasible for some supplier to help develop.
Good, great question. Yes. Oops.
The wife gets to go first.
Smart move.
This chart right here from Dataspeed talks about plug and play that looks like it might be available now, but then it refers to R&D. So I'm wondering, is this something available to the public now or just for research and development?
So at Dataspeed, what we produce is a system that goes inside one of those vehicles that allows the developers, the development community, the R&D community to take the component that they're working on for autonomy and put it into a vehicle and do some road testing. But these vehicles, they're not available to the general public. They're available to the research community, to the R&D community.
Yes.
Will there be any provisions on the vehicle itself to override the system? And the reason I'm asking is, suppose you're in a vehicle and you see a blind person in the area and you want to slow it down. Can you do anything?
Everybody hear the question? Question was, will there be any manual override in the system such if there was a situation that you as the driver wanted to take control, slow the vehicle down in a situation, will there be a manual override in an autonomous vehicle?
So for autonomy, they talk about different levels of autonomy, level 1 being basically no autonomy, to level 5 being fully autonomous with no availability for the driver to, because you remove the steering wheel. So anything below levels 4 on down, you'd be able to intercede on behalf of the vehicle. So personally, it's going to be a long time before I would get into a level 5 autonomous vehicle, because I don't know, I'm too much of an engineer. I understand where technology can go wrong.
I think it's a guy thing.
Other questions? Yes.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is about your demonstration on the driving. So I noticed that as the car turns, all the traffic stops. There's no traffic around you, so that really doesn't reassure me on the safety of the vehicle when you do the demonstration. The next question is, you're talking about parking and the parking structures and all the rest of that. As a city, how do you propose to replace those parking tickets and the cost of parking for running the city?
Sure. Well, the first question, and I'm not the person to talk to Paul's technology, but we were basically, in our video, we were on somewhat of a closed course. There was traffic around us, but there was an opportunity for a manual override because I think of the levels of autonomy that we were in the vehicle. It was a lower level autonomy vehicle. So I could hit the brake if a ball ran across the road or a kid or something like that. But I wasn't steering or anything. It was on a route that it had known and it was.
With no cars around.
Oh, there were cars. There were cars. There were cars. I mean, we drove past a Burger King and through a bunch of different places. But I had the ability, and Paul did too, I think, to manually override the vehicle if we needed to. The idea is just to think about it. Now, fortunately, in my city, we don't have parking meters or parking structures, and so that from my community, that's not a big revenue source I'm trying to replace, but for many communities it really is. And so the idea is to think about that. Maybe you don't need the traffic enforcement, the person that maybe walks up and down, to do that enforcement. That person could be retrained and could be deployed in some other fashion for a city or whatnot. It's more just to think about, wow, that's interesting. I could imagine a life not getting a ticket if you're in an autonomous vehicle, and you don't have to worry about your speed, and you don't have to worry about rolling stops. Kind of makes everybody safer. So if you take that cost component out, it's beneficial for the person driving, but there's a ramification for a community. Maybe those officers can be deployed in a different way as opposed to traffic enforcement. Maybe they can be employed more community policing or some other things. So it's just a community question that you can think about a little bit differently about maybe how you deploy resources in the future. Other questions? Yes.
Is the government going to impose a lot of regulations on specifications that the individual companies that have these systems have to meet? Or are there specifications now already in place? Like if I'm purchasing a car with a system, how do I know that it's a good system?
Sure. I don't know, Paul, if you ventured into that at all yet, or?
My understanding, it hasn't been all ironed out yet, but NHTSA and some other governing bodies, they're going to they will come up with some recommendations that the OEMs would follow. And that's something even my company's involved in, is how to test autonomous vehicles and verify that they do what they're supposed to do in a safe manner. I would say this, that the development of autonomous vehicles, probably the leader in development is probably Google Waymo, and they do huge amounts of simulation. They simulate everything. I was told they do run 10 million virtual driver miles a night in simulation. So they're constantly iterating and learning from the vehicles they deploy to make their fleet safer, and that design methodology will filter down to the OEMs, and anybody else that's involved in it. It might take some time, but it'll get there.
You know, an interesting, Ted, I think that certainly the government will want to have some level of regulation. You know, regulation, over-regulation is bad. Some level of regulation is important. But I would also, I think experience would tell you that the technology won't necessarily wait for the government to get it right. And if you think about Uber and Lyft, those things entered the market and were so popular with customers that government then tried to catch up. You know, what do we need to do? Does there need to be tests on drivers? Should there be background? You know, but the market demanded that there was a need, and that the community. Now you can imagine, again, maybe in this audience, maybe not, but certainly you can talk to your kids and grandkids. If the government were to come in and say, okay, we're going to stop Uber and Lyft until we get the regulations worked out, people would go crazy and say, this is no. You know, we need this here. We need this technology, and we like it. So. I think government certainly will probably step in and be very much a part of this moving forward, but the technology and the demand won't wait for the government to get things perfect. It will burst onto the system, and it will create a need, I believe, in the communities, and people will demand the government follow and either keep it safe or enter or exit regulations as it moves forward. Other questions? Yes?
When you roll this out on a mass basis, what infrastructure changes need to be done? And what are you doing to communicate that to the government, or like the municipalities, so that if you need smart roads, that can be ready for it?
It's a good question. I know Paul now is the industry expert nationally on some of this stuff, right? Of course, he into this a little bit. Well, I can only say that this is that's a great question. I mean, really, does everybody hear the question? I mean, you know, and that's really, the infrastructure question is really, is every time I go, like I said, I'm speaking at the AARP next week in Charlotte. I wrote an article in a national publication earlier this year. These are questions that people are asking, you know, and I can imagine, let me make a loose analogy for a minute. And of course I wasn't there, and I know that none of you were there either, but you can imagine all these questions about infrastructure and safety and how are autonomous vehicles going to interact with non-autonomous vehicles. You think, oh my gosh, we've never been there before, but then I'm reminded that at one point our forefathers said, okay, you know, we're pretty used to these horses and we get around pretty safely with these horses. How are vehicles going to interact with horses? There's got to be safety, there's got to be infrastructure, and I imagine that this conversation 100 years ago was held in some room where people said, this will never work. There's going to have to be infrastructure, and this combination of technologies, horses and vehicles, will never work. And now here we are 100 years later talking about driverless vehicles and vehicles with drivers, and really asking a lot of the same questions. How will this technology be deployed in a way that's safe for people? And so it's a great question, Jim. I don't know if we have all the answers to it, but those are the kinds of questions that people are asking right now, and advancing and putting tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in, because this wave of technology is coming quickly. Jean, did you want to add anything to that?
I was going to say that I think the mayor is being also somewhat modest, because the mayors are actually taking quite a bit of leadership on this front. one, allowing some of the pilots to actually exist within their communities, and only through that real testing, in my opinion, do you actually figure out some of the real needs from an infrastructure standpoint. So to what the mayor alluded to before in terms of 5G systems being inserted, smart city grids also being used, parking, sidewalk use if there's going to be more of a ride share. So I think the leadership that the mayors are really demonstrating is really, I think, what's helping us get to some of those answers around infrastructure.
Time for a couple more questions. Yes?
Should the public be allowed to vote on whether they want to allow this technology in their area?
Well, what does the public think about that? I'm curious. I mean, what is the? Maybe tell me a little bit more. Are you concerned that? What would the vote be?
Up or down? Yes or no?
Whether the technology should exist or should be deployed or?
Deployed, yes.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think in the example that I just described of Uber and Lyft, that the public is voting. They're voting with their pocketbooks. They're suggesting that they like this advanced mobility, and for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, for all the things that we have to talk about, for the challenges that exist that many of you are identifying relative to liability and practical deployment, that the idea of extending mobility for seniors, for the disabled community, for folks that maybe can't afford a vehicle now, for the folks that, changing the face of mobility. I think that there's enough energy and excitement about all of those things that I personally believe that the public will demand that people in Paul's industry innovate, that people in my industry figure out how to work with the innovators to bring it to communities, that people in Jean's industry figure out how to educate, and I think that this kind of technology, if you look at the kind of vehicle you drive, and I don't know you, sir, but I'm guessing there's probably a lot of technology in your vehicle that didn't exist, 15 or 20 years ago, that assists you and many of the folks in this room. And so my guess is there a public vote? I think the public will vote by their interest in this, by whether or not they want to purchase one. And if there wasn't an interest in purchasing one, or there wasn't an interest in seeing this move forward, Paul's company is not going to make any money. He's not going to have any customers. Neither will Ford, GM, or Chrysler. But I think what they're saying, based on their investment, is that there is massive interest in this and massive interest in the communities to move it forward.
The question is, when the technology inevitably breaks down, and it will, causes accidents, who's liable?
Yeah. Great question. I think that's what we're dealing with now. I don't know if you want to.
There is no clear answer right now. I think there's a lot of discussion around trying to figure that out. I will sort of reinforce what the mayor said in terms of voting with your consumer decisions right now. So again, to this whole point of how will this technology really see the light of day? Again, our sense of it is it's going to actually run on the sort of little rails of the rideshare service, and as we see that's gaining popularity across the board. So a lot of, I think, our education currently, because we want to be also on top of this technology to understand it like you, and so we are actually trying to, again, with our segment of the population, trying to figure out if education will actually boost adoption of rideshare first. And then to your question around liability, if that becomes the case, then I think there is a question to be asked in terms of if it is riding through another organization. That, I think, is a broader question focused on liability, if that makes sense.
Those are great answers. And those are really great questions, sir. And I don't tend to be flippant about them at all. I think that many of you probably came here wondering those same exact things. I would suggest to you one other scenario is that Jean woke up this morning 700 miles away from here, and utilized the technology that probably your parents and grandparents thought similarly will certainly break down. Why would you get in a plane and trust that this giant, hugely heavy thing will fly through the air and take you safely somewhere? And now for all of us, that's really second nature. That's how you visit kids and grandkids. It's how you get around in a very normal fashion. So technology continues to advance, and we either can embrace it or reject it, and at least hopefully these conversations prove to embrace it. We have time for maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll break out. Anybody who hasn't asked a question yet, I'm trying to get to those folks. Yes?
This is directed toward Paul. In your brochure, you mentioned a program going on in a 50-plus community in California. And I was wondering, was that directed to seniors, thinking that is a segment that you need to have some changes in thinking and want to see how that's going to fly with people? And how is it?
So those communities are generally closed, gated communities, kind of controlled. And I think, and the reason that they start with those is we're still kind of in this R&D type phase, and for that particular company, they wanted to deploy their technology in a very controlled environment. And those, because it was a gated, closed community, they had better control of the technology. And not only that, the market need there is, mobility for seniors, is to give the seniors in those communities more choices to remain mobile.
Listen, yes, in the very, very back for our last question.
Yes, this is for the mayor.
Uh-oh.
Sir, if a given entity can deliver groceries or a pizza through an autonomous vehicle, why can't a municipality entertain this technology for services that you provide?
Great question. I think if you hear that, if I can order my groceries online and we can, there's all these other service industries, why can't cities embrace it and provide it for the services that we provide? Great question. I think we can, and I think we will. I think as it begins to get more deployed more evenly, I think communities like ours will look at it. I have a fleet of like 200 vehicles. I probably don't need a fleet of 200 vehicles in the city of Rochester Hills for our assessors and our DPS and all the folks that use vehicles. And so if we could find ways to get that fleet down to 70, because there's unique ride sharing that my employee could get out and then the vehicle could go pick up someone else and take them somewhere, I would be one of the first people to want that in Rochester Hills. Number one, because we're an innovative community. Number two, because at the bottom line, at the end of the day, if it could save me money and I could use those resources elsewhere, I'm really interested in that. Unfortunately, my industry, government, isn't always at the bleeding cutting edge of technology. Sometimes governments tend to be more risk adverse, and so we tend to be a little later to the game. But in this aspect, in this regard, I really think there are great opportunities for municipalities to provide services and to embrace this technology, ultimately for the sole reason that it improves the quality of life for our residents. That's really the purpose. Listen, I'm going to ask each of them to maybe just provide a final thought or two, and then we'll wrap up. We will stay up. Well, at least Jean and I will stay up here. Paul may have to go out to his vehicle with his team so that you guys can see and poke and take a look at the vehicle that's out there. But maybe Paul, last reflections of our session here today.
Yeah, Mayor, thank you for having us here today, and I hope that this session was informative and maybe inspirational for the talk on autonomy. And we do have a vehicle out front. It's a Chrysler Pacifica that has some of the technology on there that these vehicles would have. If you want to come on and take a look, we'd be glad to talk to you a little bit more about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Also, I want to echo my thank you to the mayor for having us here today. It's been a real delight. Because again, AARP is a membership organization. Our real mission is to fight for the rights of people over the age of 50, as well as equip you through education so that it empowers you to make the best decisions. On this issue of driving and extending independence through driving, AARP has been in this business for 40 years through our AARP Driver Safety Program. We've been providing an 8-hour course that's available to all of you. If you actually take that course, you can get a discount on your car insurance. So for the questions related to the cost of car insurance, we actually have education that can actually reduce your car insurance expenses. Again, through that mechanism, we also want to ensure that you understand how your vehicle and the technology in your vehicle can extend your safe driving years. And the Smart Driver Tech pop-up that's in the front of the OPC gives you an example of that. And also, we're slowly introducing new curriculum, again, focused on rideshare and how you use that technology to expand your mobility options. And we did talk a little bit about mobility as a service, which we didn't really get too much into, but that again is using, again, an app solution to get you connected to more than just a single source rideshare, to multiple sources, so that you can plan your trip from A to B and figure out all the different options on a single platform, a single payment system, really easy to use. And we're also testing that in Columbia, South Carolina now. So again, with your good input from today and also through our surveys and our educational programs, we want to hear from you. We want to understand how this is going to improve your lives, and just couldn't be happier to hear from you today. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say thank you to Paul and to Jean for being here today. I hope you found value in this session, and I'm guessing that some of you, again, I think hopefully it's a little bit of excitement. Maybe there's still a little fear, but hopefully there's a little bit of inspiration there, and when you do get around those conversations, hopefully you can repeat some of these things that you've heard and talk about them with your colleagues, and maybe there's some other great questions that will guide the AARP, Jean, and folks in my industry that try to educate, and folks in Paul's industry. I think some of the questions about what else could these vehicles do? How could they provide even more services for certain communities that they serve are great, because I think this is really an area that is evolving. So please join me in giving a round of applause to Jean and to Paul for being here today. And thank you for being here. Thank the OPC for hosting us. I invite all of you back to the next Mondays with the Mayor. It is Monday, December 3rd. And thank you so much for your support of the community. Thanks, everybody.